So welcome everybody. Welcome to Expect the Unexpected, supporting students during a global pandemic. My name is Ariana Kinjerski. I'm an education specialist here at Royal Roads University. I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Robin Mueller and some wonderful panelists with us today. And I will go ahead just to start us off here to introduce Robin, and maybe you can let us know a little bit more about how this title came to be, and then we will kick it off here. And over to you, Robin.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming. I was going to say good morning. It's just past morning here, but happy whatever time of day it is, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about this session. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, the reasons why we're hosting this webinar. Our Master's in Higher Education Administration and Leadership is actually designed with applied scholarship in mind. And in that program, we regularly explore current issues like this that happen across the higher education landscape. So this offers a bit of a taste of the kind of dialogue that we participate in regularly throughout our program. Also, we're trying to enable our own kind of responsiveness here, understanding that as a result of the pandemic and all other kinds of things happening across the higher education landscape, we are feeling increasingly disconnected in our roles. So we're hoping that this will be an opportunity for people to connect and for us to engage in a conversation that is meaningful to people who are both administrators and leaders in higher education. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the title, Expect the Unexpected, when supporting students during a global pandemic. Just for your information, the McLeod program, our Master's in Higher Education Administration and Leadership, involves a 2-week residency at the beginning of the program that happens at the end of July. This past July, we hosted our first face-to-face residency since the beginning of the pandemic. And I did some, as program head for McLeod, I did some contingency planning to try and plan for what might emerge during the residency. I was new to my role at that time, new to the university. So I did some calling around. I talked to other program heads. I knew that we were kind of on an uptick of COVID cases in the province at that time. So I just wanted to be sure that we were doing our due diligence. And what I learned fairly quickly was that my imagination did not stretch far enough. Because when our cohort of learners arrived on campus, roughly a third of them got COVID. And we had to respond really quickly to that situation in all kinds of ways that included pragmatic things like supporting ill students who were isolating on our campus, but also on the academic side, ensuring that we could change our model of delivery and even change the way that we were assessing students' participation in the residency. So it got me wondering. It got me wondering about how we can prepare to be more responsive and how to lead responsively to better support our students during times like a global pandemic. And that's what brings us here today. So I've invited a pretty great panel of people who are working in student service roles in higher education across Canada. And I'll maybe give them an opportunity to introduce themselves now, Ariana.
Thank you so much, Robin. Before we begin, I'll just go ahead and acknowledge our traditional lands. It's something that's really important to us at Royal Roads University. So before we begin, we do acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Wisipsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. It is with deep gratitude that we live, work, and play on these lands where non-Indigenous and Indigenous staff and students come together. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And without further ado, we will go ahead and just go over a little bit of our structure for the discussion. We will do just the welcome and land acknowledgement quickly. We will have a conversation. Of course, we're going to introduce our panelists in a moment. And then just at the end, quickly, we'll discuss a little bit of the program and the admissions and just leave time for any questions. So as we said, we have our wonderful panelists here with us today. I will go ahead and just quickly introduce them and then give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Irlanda Gonzalez-Price, who is the AVP of Student Affairs at Vancouver Island University. Irlanda, would you like to unmute yourself and say a quick hello?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, I guess, or good evening. So my name is Irlanda Gonzalez-Price, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Student Affairs here at Vancouver Island University. My pronouns are she and her, and today I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw people, where on a daily basis, I feel great gratitude to be and live, to work, to research, and to play on the beautiful territory of the Snuneymuxw. So I raise my hands. Haichka.
Thank you so much, Irlanda. And we will go ahead and also introduce Kim Matheson, who is the Manager of Career Services at the University of Saskatchewan. Kim.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Kim Matheson. I serve as the Manager of Career Services at the University of Saskatchewan here in Saskatoon, where weather is lovely. We had a beautiful snowfall yesterday, so it feels quite Christmassy here, and I'm just embracing it as I get ready to put up my tree this week. So I'm enjoying it, and it's not too cold yet. As many of you know, it gets quite cold here. So I'm positioned, and the University of Saskatchewan is positioned on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And we love to come together and just reaffirm our relationships with each other here in Saskatoon. The river runs right through our city, in case you've never been here. So it's a really important gathering space for us, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much, Kim. We are delighted to have you as well. It is a pleasure to introduce Tim Fricker, who is the Dean of Students at Conestoga College. Tim, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be part of this conversation today. I come to you from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral Peoples. I'm at Conestoga College currently, and anyways, excited to have this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim, for being here. And we also have Kyla McLeod, who is the Director of Student Services at none other than, of course, Royal Roads University. Kyla?
Hi, thank you. My name is Kyla McLeod, and I do have the great privilege to work and play at Royal Roads University on the lands of Lekwungen and Gwisatsam families and ancestors. But today, because it's a snow day and it's Victoria, I am working from home. And so I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wasanich people, and in particular of Sartlip First Nation. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this conversation, and thank you to all of those who have joined us from across different spaces. I saw that -18 in there, so I will not whinge about the snow that we're getting today. I look forward to a great conversation. I love being part. I just want to shout out to the Mihail program. I love being part of the Mihail program because it's just an opportunity for people to come together and learn about the work that we love. And so this is another space to do that. So grateful to be here today.
Thank you so much, Kyla. We are equally as grateful to have you with us. And so it is about that time for us to start the conversation, folks. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Robin to lead this wonderful conversation that we have for you today.
Thank you, Ariana. So we're here to talk about leading responsibly during a global pandemic and possibly other times of rapid change as well. I have some questions that I've prepared in advance, but I also would like to provide our panel with the opportunity to have some more fluid, organic conversation, if you will. So I'm going to start with a couple of structured questions, and then we'll move on from there. So first of all, when I say the word responsiveness in higher education, what does that mean to you? I'm going to ask Tim and Irlanda to respond to that one first. Tim, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I guess I think this is a great question because in student services, we are uniquely positioned to respond to a whole wide variety of things. Sometimes there are things that are very natural for us to respond to. Sometimes there are political things that we need to respond to. Sometimes they are basic human needs. Sometimes they're students in crisis. Responsiveness can mean a whole lot of different things. I think in the pandemic, we learned to be responsive to different kinds of things. When we think about the world and the things that were occurring, we had major movements that we probably should have been more aware of and more responsive to come to the fore. I think about Black Lives Matter. I think about the Women's March. I think about all the the things that we could have been doing more or better, and that was made painfully aware to us throughout the pandemic. So I think those are things that we think about. I think that's one part of it. I also think about the students who came to us with really, really basic needs. Like today, just in my normal day, we're still dealing with COVID quite clearly. I think about parents that can't find Tylenol and acetaminophen for their kids. I think about the our student parents that are dealing with just some basic human needs, some accessibility, some accommodations, financial affordability, hunger. All of these things have, I think, popped up more than ever before, in part because of the pandemic. So I think about responsiveness from all of those lenses.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. Irlanda, do you have anything to add to that?
Great. Thanks, Tim. That also kind of echoes a bit of the things that I was thinking about as well. One of the things that, how do I start? So one of the things that is really important, I think, in student affairs is really meeting our students where they are. And throughout the pandemic, what became increasingly clear or clearer is that we might think we know what those needs are, but the pandemic really showed us that the array of needs was so broad that it was very difficult for the institution to be all things to all people. And so that was a hard lesson that I believe we all have had to kind of think about and really sort of learn from, because when we're talking about things, Tim, like basic needs, right? When you have a child at home who is ill or you have no daycare, or the housing crisis that's happening right now across the country, like basic needs aren't being met. And so our response needs to be flexible in how we support our students through all of these things. And so, you know, another thing that became increasingly important and more so, I believe, since the pandemic, is our approach to being responsive in a truly trauma-informed way. And I think that the different levels of crisis and response that students had and our communities had really trickled down into our own internal institutional communities. And I'm speaking broadly for my colleagues, and I see a lot of nodding heads across the country, but I'm also really speaking from the experience here at VIU. And also, one of the things that when I think about responsiveness in higher ed, I think about how we respond to our students, but then also the level of emotional weight and emotional responsibility that the student affairs team or all of the frontline responders seem to carry with them. And so when I think about, in the context of my specific portfolio as the AVP and Chief Student Officer of the institution, that's where I was going with my responsiveness, was really trying to think about, what do the students need? What are they really asking for? How can we meet those needs in a quick, concise, clear way? But then also, how do I protect my team so that they're not feeling the pressure of these needs to be so responsive to everything? So it was a bit of a walking a fine line. Yeah, and I can talk about this for a long time, so maybe I'll pause there. But I think responsiveness looks different now than it did before.
Thank you, Irlanda. Now, to build on that, and thinking about what these two panelists have just said, we also know that in student affairs and services, we work in an environment that is built on a colonial and bureaucratic structure. And that makes it difficult to be responsive sometimes in terms of the barriers that are just a part of our institutional structures. So, bearing in mind what we mean when we say responsiveness, how can we lead in ways that enable a greater degree of responsiveness to student needs, despite the fact that we work in this setting in a bureaucratic structure during times of rapid change, like the global pandemic. I'm going to pose that question to Kim and Kyla. Kim, if I could ask you to start.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tim and Irlanda. Those were, yeah, really inspiring thoughts, and my mind was just kind of connecting the dots to this question, knowing it was coming, and thinking through. For me, I've been thinking since we had this initial kind of conversation about this panel about things that I kind of witnessed from leaders around me, as well as myself as a leader. And some of the things that I found were most successful or most helpful, most productive were around being very relational as leaders in times of rapid change, and being responsive in that way, so that you can learn from your peers. I think about the relationships that I've built virtually over the past 3 years with peers from across the country and institutions from across the country. How are you doing that? How did you make that work? What are you guys doing here? And just kind of coming together, either formally or informally, and just learning from each other, being approachable, being open to those conversations, looking to our peers, looking to learn from each other. That's been huge. And also being accessible to those that we serve. So very relational in that way. And those that we serve in terms of our team, as Irlanda was talking about, responsiveness to students, and also protecting our team. So being accessible to those that we serve, so that they know that they can show up and be very honest and vulnerable with where they're at and where they may be struggling. I think it also connects into being really thoughtful and intentional as leaders. I think helps us to be responsive in times of rapid change, but also balancing that with, sometimes you just have to jump at opportunities. Sometimes you just cannot afford to say no to something. And even though it may not strategically or align with the timeline that you had in mind, sometimes those opportunities just present themselves. And I think that's a way that we can be responsive, is putting aside maybe a structure that we had in mind in favor of just capitalizing on something that presents itself. To me, I've experienced that as a way to be responsive. And then the third thought that I had in mind was really around modeling transparency and authenticity as a way to be responsive as a leader. Being honest about, I don't know the answer. But I'm willing to kind of link arms with you and roll up my sleeves and walk through it and figure it out together. And also modeling wellness. I know I've got a lot of feedback from my team that I was always very mindful of my team's wellness, and I was careful to model that and being vulnerable at times when I was not modeling it. And owning that and saying, I admit I do work very late into the evenings, and I need to kind of put a boundary on that. So those are some of the things that jumped out for me in terms of, just being responsive there.
Thank you, Kim. Kyla.
Sure, it's fun going last because my head is now spinning with all of what's been shared there, and just observing some of the themes that came up right from the first question through. What hasn't been said explicitly, but I think we've all shared, and everyone in this room can talk about, is that need to see the student as a whole, right? The holistic support. And I think what Tim was talking about, and Irlanda as well, around, if we're thinking about responsiveness and leadership, really understanding that at this time that we are in a time that is like no other. We are still in it, right? I'm saying that now. We're still actively working ourselves through this. There is this among so many of those other times. We can't go back and go, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? We have, I think, I really resonated when you mentioned, Kim, the relational piece, because I had written down that piece to me was critical for the work that we did, was to lean on that space of those relationships and the collaboration. And I know that in previous times prior to the pandemic, and I came through residence life and a lot of that leadership training stuff that we would do, and all the team building, and so I'm a really big one for team building, and yes, we have to stop and have these, whether we're breaking bread together or whether we're having our retreats. it's the relationships you build in those times that then you draw on those times of complete uncertainty. And that's what the pandemic brought us, was complete uncertainty in so many ways. And when those relationships exist and that fabric has been established, you can pull each other through, I think, a little more effectively. So that care and relationship building, definitely the creative aspect of thinking about how we do this in a different way that we haven't ever done before. And then just on the tactical end, communication. So communication amongst ourselves within the organization, critical in our institutions, and the authentic. I like that idea of being really vulnerable and saying, I might not know, but students need to know. They need to know that you're there, that you might not know exactly what the next step is going to come, but you're in it together. And I think as Tim was saying too, that we are supporting them in different ways. Like we still are just their school, and yet we're not. And I think about how many times too we became, oddly enough, COVID experts for them too, right? So we're letting them know, well, this is what self-isolation looks like. And this is when you actually do need to go talk to your healthcare practitioner. And here's how you get those tests. Like we were linked to our, here in British Columbia, right? Like we're linked to the BC CDC, or we're linked to those agents where in different ways, like we're called on to do very different things than we've ever been called on to before. And students, I think, needed, like we became more in that respect for students in that way. So we had to think about our jobs differently. And then I think for survival, we had to then lean on each other in different ways. And that other piece around care and compassion, and exactly what you were saying, Kim, is giving each other space and flexibility and an opportunity to not know and take time and to be able to learn together. And some of the collaboration, Irlanda, I think you were speaking about this too, some of the collaboration that happened as a result of the pandemic is like nothing I've ever seen in my career history. And so leaning again on that, on how we silos really came down, I think, within institutions and across institutions, but how we could support each other through that. And so then, to me, it really spoke to the kind of leader I want to be in that space, right? It's authentic and vulnerable and connected, and why are we here, and what's our purpose and intent, and how do we support through? So those are all my thoughts on that. I'm not sure how, I tried to get tactical and then I veered away from it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyla. So building on everything that has just been said, I'm making connections with my experience with the cohort that I described early on in our session, where a cohort of students came to campus for their face-to-face residence, and a third of them contracted COVID during that time. And some of the things I noticed were that the nature of the work, my work as a leader, changed. It was way different than what I thought it would be at that time. So with the relationship piece and thinking about not just relationships with the staff you're working with and with those in the institution, but with the students. So I was regularly corresponding with the students, both individually and collectively, who were a part of that cohort. And we were decision-making collaboratively, which is not something that I'd done before in that kind of rapidly emerging situation. So we were meeting in a way that was very unfamiliar. So some of us were Zooming in from isolation, and some of us were face-to-face in a classroom space. And we were having this collaborative conversation about, okay, so pragmatically, what do you need in order to feel safe in this environment? And then what do you need to feel safe as a student? So we had all of these expectations set up, and some of them involve assessment of your learning in these two courses that you're tackling in a really intensive way right now. But we can't do that assessment the way we had planned. So how do you want to do it? And having those kinds of collaborative conversations with students was not, it was work that I was prepared to do relationally, but hadn't done before in that kind of quickly changing situation. And we also know that that kind of relationship building takes time. So in order to really get to know people and figure out how to best support them, what I needed then was more time than I had. So given those given those constraints? How do we do that? How do we lean on relationship and building trust with one another when we're pressed for time in a rapidly changing situation? I'll throw that out to all of you. Okay, go.
I'll just call it out and say, sometimes it's just not possible. That being said, the other things that might be priorities or seem to be priorities are likely no longer priorities. If you're responding to the emerging issues, if you're thinking about the human beings, you're thinking about each other as adults, as capable, as needing support, and are willing to accept support and working together collaboratively, I think you're probably doing your job at your best. And Kyla, going back to your days in res life, because you called it out, like you're probably acting more like an RA in that moment, where you're just facilitating conversations and those basic leadership skills, and just doing a great job. It's, you know, I've probably had more conversations with students directly and parents directly of late than I have in the last couple of years. And I'm going back to those basic skills. How do we facilitate a conversation about this challenging scenario that is in front of us? Help me understand your perspective. I'm going to try to help you understand the college's perspective. And we're going to try to figure out the best way forward here, guided by some basic principles, some basic policies, those kinds of things. That can be done in a whole variety of environments without needing to have the big leadership title behind you. It can just be done with good work and professionalism. I think that's a whole different kind of leadership. I think that's a whole different kind of responsiveness, to use, I think, Irlanda's saying of meet students where they're at. But that means that you got to be like, truly, it's not just about meeting their need. It's like, I think you have to change who you are and how you do that sometimes, and be your more natural self, perhaps.
Anyone want to build on that? Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think that's a really, really strong point, because as a leader, of course, we were trying to navigate the quick changing rules and regulations, and the yes, the no, the this, the that, and then trying to create a plan of communication with our students that was understandable to them in a timely fashion. And so I think that it's going back to the basics and being really true to who you are as a person and how you choose to communicate, for me, was something that was really important. And sitting with the team after we've done a plan, it's complete, we're ready to go, ready to hit send, and then the orders change and restrictions change. So we're back at the same conversation, the same table for the same amount of hours, trying to figure these things out, and having sitting there despite the title and the names and all the things, and just sitting with the team, because everyone was feeling that sense of overwhelm, exhaustion, instability, fear, all of those things. And I think that it can't be underestimated how important it is to just go back to those basic tenets of who you are as a person, how you communicate, and being truly authentic in your leadership in all times. But during this time, it just felt like that was the only way that we were all going to get through it collectively.
Sorry, Kim, were you going? No, okay. I can jump in with something that we were doing an initiative within our team that had started shortly before the pandemic. And it was actually exploring what does it look like to try and decolonize our work. So as a student services team, we'd engaged in what at that time were started at face-to-face weekly conversations that we had done it for those that know Warlords and at Stuckley Eland in our Blue Heron House, and initially pre-pandemic, and engaged members of our Heron people in just in dialogue around, if we were to explore what this means, what does this conversation look like? And then the pandemic hit, and so those face-to-face conversations, weekly conversations, stopped, and we had just started them. Like, I think they started in December. We had a larger retreat in December and a commitment to meet weekly after that. And then in as the pandemic moved, we had our very first one. We tried to say who can come. At that time, where our elders were at, we couldn't engage our elders in Zoom, but we kept meeting as a staff. And so we had staff meetings separate from these weekly meetings that were our conversations on decolonization. And those spaces, because they were unstructured, they had no specific agenda, and yet they were bringing up what was really important and critical questions and thoughts, became an unbelievable space of like, and I didn't know that's where they're going to go. Nobody did, but they became a space of safety, of comfort. Like we're several weeks and months into the pandemic, and when we were talking to around priorities and what we want to do, no one was willing to get rid of those, because those were the times where we could come together and be authentic and be real and connect. And so I just want to say that was an interesting observation that we didn't know was going to come through that, but that commitment that was made among us to come together and learn together, and that we held together, built an amazing amount of trust and support and connection, particularly when people were starting to feel really disconnected through the digital technologies that we were using and the lack of opportunity to informally connect and engage. So that was such a beautiful way of trying to maintain the relationship piece, and the learning that came out of that wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And it was pretty phenomenal. We're still learning. We're still on our journey. We'll be on that one for a long time. But I just am very grateful to the intentional time that we took to do those kind of things, because they were so important. And so then I think, Tim, about that idea around what we have time for and what we don't. Like making time for each other to have to be together and sit together, regardless of title, right? And come in those spaces. That became more critical than other KPIs or work plan initiatives, for sure.
That makes me think, Kyla, of the title of this session, Expecting the Unexpected. So something unexpected was generative and supportive. So I'm wondering now, what I'm hearing across the sector is a little bit of despair from folks who work in higher education, seeing the propensity, I guess, for institutions to want to bounce back to normal, to go back to how things were. So what do we do with that when we're finding things that work to help us lead responsively that may be unexpected? How do we hold on to those things when there's a real tendency to want to go back to the status quo and the state of affairs? Kim, I think maybe you've had some experiences in career ed around that.
Yeah, I was just thinking I was going to jump in there. I think what I've found, particularly the past 6-8 months, as we've transitioned back to campus, both as a team of staff, we've seen our students come back. This fall was our first kind of full term back. What we were really conscious of moving into this term is that our students, first and foremost, our students have changed. My youngest right now, she is graduating in the spring. So her entire university experience has been pretty much during the pandemic. She had her first half term was what was traditional. And so I find when it comes to, I know working with my team in terms of pitching out ideas, I've really encouraged the team to just try different things, because we have a group of students that are not coming with the expectations of when we left. So for example, when I think about our career fairs, so the last live career fair, in-person career fair that we had would have been September 2019. Those students are graduating or graduated. And so every student that we're meeting with now, the first, second, third year students, do not have that benchmark to kind of measure things in terms of what that experience should be like, where it should exist. So students are more open, I find, to non-traditional degree completion pathways. They're exploring remote work opportunities. Like any of us, we've used the pandemic, we've leveraged the pandemic. The pandemic has given us an opportunity to really think about our values, our goals, our needs, where they want to head. It's kind of a little bit of that existential crisis that's happened, it's happened for our students as well. And so I think because of that, we have a responsibility to not revert back, because our students are not the same. They're not the same learners. And for us to revert back to the same practices is really, it's a responsibility, but also it's a missed opportunity, I feel, because it's a chance to just start from a blank slate in terms of a student kind of development and a student life cycle perspective.
Thank you, Kim. Tim, I see you unmuted, and I know that I've heard you speak in the past about we haven't really thought very deeply about what it means to change how we deliver our programs and services to students. So I see you, would you like to build on that, what Kim has just said?
I guess my question that I'm going to try to answer a little bit is, to what end? Right. And so the question is to go back to the way it was. For what purpose? Why? What's the goal? I think we do a good job of trying to ground ourselves in theory. Constantly try to remind ourselves that so much theory in student affairs and higher ed is highly dated and not representative of the whole student population. And I think there's a lot of work we need to do thinking critically about student development theory. But the one thing that we could do better at in student affairs is trying to deeply understand the needs of our students. What real data do we have? And in being practitioners first and maybe scholars second, in a way, sometimes the best evidence we have are stories. And so we think about the stories and the experiences we have talking to our students. And we can talk about how this student was able to access this program because it was online. And this student might not be able to access higher education anymore if we go back to the way we did it before. And so there's great good that can come from using a story to help our institution figure that out. So there's kind of one anecdote I wanted to share related to that. And I think sometimes the political pressures that our senior leaders experience all over the place are huge, and I don't want to discount them. But I think we have this unique role and capacity to think about the emerging issues from our students' perspectives and share that with other senior leaders that maybe we don't do often enough. And so I want to give credit, I think it's to Ian Cruikshank, who said once to me that we are often in student affairs the windshield wipers for our institution as we are going through stormy weather. We can provide some clarity if we think about our role in that way and help people see the path forward. And so some of that might come down to, why do we need to go back? And here's some other ways to think about it that might bring some clarity to our senior leaders.
So how do we collect those narratives and how do we share them effectively? Sorry, I jumped in on you there, Irlanda.
No, you stumped me because I was thinking I was on a different thought process. Can I just go back to the last bit because it's kind of I think that it would be irresponsible of us to go back to exactly who we were pre-pandemic, because not only have our students changed, but our entire societies have changed. Our everything, there are communities, internal and external to post-secondary, our political structures, there's so much conflict and so many different really loud points of views. Like the country became completely divided on many issues throughout the pandemic. And I think our responsibility is to educate anyone who comes forward to be educated, whether you agree with their point of thinking or not, or whether they agree with each other. And so I think that especially when we're working with underrepresented communities, like we cannot go back to the way we were before because everything is different. And so it would be irresponsible for us as leaders, senior leaders, post-secondary institutions to assume that we can.
I agree. I wonder, when we're working with policies and structures that are encouraging a return, what can we do to encourage responsive leadership in the area of student affairs particularly? How can we give voice to that institutionally?
Well, and I think then just jumping on the question that you posed earlier on how do we get those stories, we do have to become, well, to Tim's point, the windshield wiper, where we can create the viewpoint to the experience of the students that has been drastically altered and shifted. And what are those things? Now, it wasn't, although we created access for some, other students struggles, right, with the online access. And so how do we then leverage what we learned and move forward in a way that increases access, that increases connection, that increases community, or to your point, Irlanda, about making sure that everyone that comes forward and that wants us has the opportunity, right, to be met where they're at. So how do we then highlight, showcase, put the spotlight on the stories and the experiences of our students, where we can highlight what worked and why we need to keep doing it, right? From the appreciative lens, or if we don't continue with this new initiative, who we're going to lose, who we're going to miss, or what we're going to miss as a result of that. Because so I do think that that's ongoing, and that we do it with our students, right? We do it through the relationships that we have, where we can then be, I think, the spotlight or the windshield wiper to let that story come through, and to facilitate every opportunity we can to showcase those. I think we do have that responsibility.
Do any of you have any strategies for recruiting student voice into this project or this process? Like, how do we hear what students have to say? And how do we hear what they authentically have to say, so they're not saying what they think we want to hear?
I mean, this might sound really kind of basic, honestly, but it's really inviting them to share space and bringing them into the development of policies, conversations, process changes, really looking at students from a diverse background and perspective, recognizing that one person isn't speaking for a whole group, but trying to bring as many perspectives into our conversations as possible. And so during the pandemic, when we were trying to increase and have like student engagement for those students that were trying to come to school during that time, we had many virtual, and we were all tired of virtual, but we had many virtual events where in the background there was like a little fireplace, and we had fireside chats, and it was just like, how are you guys doing? What's happening? And at different times of the day, so that we could try and meet students across different time zones. And so it sounds like a really kind of basic response to a really kind of complicated question, but it really was just sitting down and sharing space and telling stories and tell me what your experiences are. And I think, Tim, you mentioned earlier that you're having more conversations with students directly and parents directly than you probably have in a really long time. And I find that I've been the same here, is that my contact information is kind of everywhere, and people just, they reach out, or yeah, and I try, I do what I can to respond to everybody. I think I do okay at that, but it's just sharing space and inviting them in, and actually just saying, whatever you say to me is okay. There's no judgment. There's not a right or wrong answer.
If I could build on that, the thing I would say that we need to do more is then we need to have a purposeful strategy, a process to capture the stories, to capture the data. Part of my reason for having more conversations is because there are really complex issues that our students are facing that are coming through. We have something called a care team at Conestoga College. It's, right, where these complex scenarios come through, and we try to provide sort of some coordinated support. And often that ends up coming through, and I get involved in some way, shape, or form. But then how do we share those stories with our colleagues? How do faculty know about that? How do deans know about that? How do the VPs in finance or administration understand that this is the stuff we're dealing with? So part of it is having the conversations with students directly and having a meaningful way to engage them and have feedback. So it can be really informal, but it's a very purposeful plan to be informal in those environments, and right? But another part of it is sitting down and having conversations with your academic advisors, with your counselors, with nurse practitioners, with the people that are working with students every day, that are hearing those stories that are really complex and hard. And they're telling you things about how this policy is really a massive barrier to this or that or the other thing. And I think without a strategy to share that and communicate it, like to me, this is a political thing. This is a different style of leadership that, I'm prepared to write a briefing note, write a story, to provide a 3-slide deck to anybody that'll listen on these kinds of things, because that's stuff that will actually move the needle and start to make a difference and help a campus and a culture change.
Thanks, Tim. Oh, Kyla, please go ahead.
Well, and then I also just, because it was spoken about earlier too, that piece around our values and working with integrity. And I think we cannot be a means to an end for our students, right? We are with, like, what this pandemic has certainly shown us, more so than ever, is that we are in relationship with these students beyond, like, from the point of time in which they're starting with us through to their beyond their completion of whatever program, certificate, degree, or other they're taking with us. And so as long as we're also always operating with integrity, honesty, integrity, purpose and intent, walking our talk in that sense, then I think it then creates the relationship, the reciprocal relationship, where they will be also more willing to share, right? And to tell you the story. If they sense that relationship isn't reciprocal and that they are a means to an end, then their willingness might not be so engaged, right? But if we have that intentional relationship with them that shows vulnerability, that shows authenticity, then there, I think, will be that more openness to say, yeah, I've got a story I want to share with you, and if it's going to help move everybody forward, move all of us forward, then I'm going to share it, and then we can take those opportunities to share those out.
Thanks, Kyla. I had one of my most productive evaluative conversations ever recently. I don't know about your institutions, but I know that our Royal Roads students get tired of surveys. They are surveyed to death. So instead of sending out a survey for our McLeod program students who were completing this year and attending convocation this fall, I sent out an email with an invitation for them to get together and have a conversation with me. So I introduced myself. I said, hey, I'm really interested in your experience of the program. I'd love to hear what you think went really well and where you think there's gaps, where there might be issues. I'd like to hear from you how we can better celebrate you and how we can meet your needs as students in this program. And a lot of them came. A lot of them came, like probably 6 times as many that would have responded to the survey showed up to this hour-long virtual conversation where we just chatted. We really just had a very organic conversation, and it was delightful, and I got to know those students better, and I heard some of those narratives and some of those stories, and I think they felt safe to share with me where there were places where we could improve. And yeah, so I think that approach is far more productive than we give it credit for sometimes. So with that said, I'm seeing that we're at 9 minutes to the hour. I would like to give Ariana a chance to share some program information and hopefully leave a couple of minutes for questions. Ariana, are you ready for that?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate that. I will just reshare my screen. Bear with me a moment, folks. Can we all see what we need to see there? Lovely screen. Excellent. Perfect. So we do have some upcoming intakes. This was a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much to Robin, to our panelists. You are all just so brilliant. I'm always sitting here marveled at all of the things that you have to say. It's just, it's amazing. So if you would like to be a part of the McLeod program or the Graduate Diploma in Higher Education Administration and Leadership, or any of the grad certificates that we offer here, we do have some upcoming intakes. So you are in luck. So we have a few start dates and application deadlines listed here on the screen. If there's one that piques your interest, you do have plenty of time to still apply, but at Royal Roads University, we do assess applications on a rolling basis, so you don't have to wait to apply. You can apply today if you'd like to, which is a wonderful thing. So if any of these pique your interest, we have a couple options, and there's more intakes as well on the website, which is royalroads.ca. If you have any interest in looking at that here, and I will just go ahead and also provide the information for our wonderful enrollment team. They are fantastic. They can be reached at the phone number listed on the screen or at learn.more@royalroads.ca. So if you send them an email, they are just a really great team of people who are able to talk with you through any of your program options and really help you narrow down what would be the best fit for yourself. And we also know going back to school is such an important commitment, and we do offer financial aid as well. The best resource for that is royalroads.ca/admission and financial aid awards. You can also, of course, find that just by searching it, but that is a great resource if you're looking for any information on financial aid. And we also have some social medias. So we have royalroads.ca that I mentioned is our website. We have Twitter, we have Instagram, and we have Facebook. If you are looking for any of those resources here, we'd love for you to join us on social media. But we did want to leave some time for questions. So we'll go ahead and open up the floor. I will stop sharing my screen again and we'll open up the floor. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat, and then we'll go ahead and read the chat and see if we can answer those for you. So I'll just stop sharing my screen quickly.
Wonderful. So
yeah,
thanks,
thank you.
Ariana. You're welcome to pose questions about the program or to our panel members. I've got my chat box open, so if you have anything you want to ask or share, I will keep my eye on it now. I feel like we ought to have the Jeopardy music playing.
I need to get that for the next webinar that we have. I will have that on cue next time, because it's always like, do we have any questions? And then forget we need to give people time to actually type their questions in the chat box if they have any, right? Awesome.
Okay, just as I'm waiting to see if there are any questions here, I would like to just express my gratitude and thanks to all the panel members, Kyla, Tim, Kim, Irlanda. Thank you for giving of your time and thought and presence today. It's deeply appreciated. And this is a conversation so you're aware, and so everyone on this call is aware, that I am interested in exploring more deeply. I am doing some research currently about organizational responsiveness in higher education. So I am happy to talk about this anytime, any day. My virtual door is open. So maybe I'll type in my contact information here too. There we go. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Panelists, do you have any last words?
I will say,
hi, Tyler. Thank you. Sorry,
I know there are lots of questions. They're just not willing to ask them yet, and that's okay. I'm sure they can reach out to you, Robin, and get some of those answered.
And some lovely words of thanks in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. And I just want to express my gratitude for the privilege of being here and having this conversation with all of you, and with the folks that joined us. I recognized some names and saw some familiar faces, and so I was happy to see that. But like Tim said, if there are any other questions, you can either contact me or whomever directly here, and or just go through Robin. Happy to continue those conversations. I think the work that we do is really critical work. You know, and one of the things you shared a little bit of a story and analogy earlier with the windshield wiper, but you know, for a long time in my career, I kept hearing that the academics drive the bus at an institution. And so finally I was so frustrated and I said, okay, but if the bus is broken, the bus has no passengers, the bus doesn't have any windows that are closing, the bus can't open its door, right? We can't have people who have who live with limited mobility. They can't get on the bus. So it's great to have the bus and huge, I mean, but it's a symbiotic relationship. And so I think it's really important that all of us in student affairs remind ourselves and continue to remind our institutions of that as well. We are a service, we are people who are here to help our students succeed, but we're a pretty critical piece of the institution and of the systems. And we're all doing pretty good work.
I agree. Thank you, Irlanda. That's a wonderful way to wrap up our session.
I was going to say here, and I saw some clapping, and I think that's the most beautiful thing is it's wonderful people are drawn to this career.
Yes, that's the thing, right, Kyla? Because we don't wake up in the morning and after high school and say, I want to be a student services professional, or I want to be a university administrator. It just doesn't work that way.
I think Robin Mueller probably woke up that way, but the rest of us didn't.
No, I actually worked in the theater, and then I met and married a musician, and we were broke, so somebody had to make some money, and I pulled the short stick on that one. So my next best option was student affairs. That's how I got into it. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. We will see you at the next webinar. We appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Take care.